Good evening, barflies and lounge lizards, and welcome to the Atomic Snack Bar. And tonight we'll be discussing some of my favorite retro space opera films that are not Star Wars. Because if you're watching this, you're probably already familiar with that whole Star Wars thing. And one of my goals with the channel is to turn folks on the stuff they haven't seen before. And number 5 on the list is The Ice Pirates from 1984. Directed by Stuart Raffle, who not only co-wrote Krull, but also wrote and directed one of the most beloved sci-fi epics of all time, Mac and Me. The Ice Pirates is a space opera comedy about a future where water is so valuable that ice cubes have become a form of currency. And the titular ice pirates get caught stealing ice and end up in the service of a princess who is searching for her father who has disappeared. And as they say, hijinks ensue. And the film stars Robert Urich as the pirate leader. Urich was a film and TV actor who also appeared in Magnum Force, Dragonfight, and the 1970s made-for-TV film Killdozer, which was based on a short by sci-fi writer Theodore Sturgeon. Next we have Mary Crosby as our space princess. Because it's a space opera, you gotta have a space princess. Crosby didn't do much in the way of sci-fi, but she was on Automan in an episode of Deep Space Nine. And speaking of, she was the real-life aunt of Denise Crosby, aka Tasha Yar, from Star Trek The Next Generation. Then we have Ron Perlman in one of his earliest roles as one of the crew members. And I'm sure you all know Perlman best as Vincent from Beauty and the Beast. And finally, I wanted to mention Ron Taylor as the voice of Pimpbot. Taylor also appeared on Deep Space Nine as well as Twin Peaks. Now, I'm not saying that Pimpbot is better than C-3PO, but I'm not saying that either. Originally titled The Water Planet, the film started out a bit more serious with almost double the budget, but the studio was having financial issues, so they asked Raffle if he could do the film for $8 million instead. He agreed, but said it would have to be rewritten as a comedy. He also didn't want the ship to be all sleek and fancy looking. The idea being that the ice pirates didn't have very good equipment, making do with what they could find. Unlike Pimpbot, who drove around in style using a vehicle he borrowed from the Logan's Run TV series from 1977, which was just one of several props reused for the ice pirates. Originally, the film ended with the pirates reaching Earth and heading to Malibu, but the studio head cut the whole bit without Raffle's knowledge, to which the director was less than pleased. And number 4 on the list is Battle Beyond the Stars from 1980. Produced by Roger Corman and directed by Jimmy Murakami, a well-known animator who also worked on Heavy Metal from 1981, Battle Beyond the Stars tells the story of a small farming planet that is being threatened by the overwhelming studliness of John Saxon. Oh, come on. I've already used that exact same joke. Man, the quality is really slipping around here. But Space Warlord Saxon has his eyes set on the small farming planet. So John Boy Walton hops aboard his squid-like boob ship and flees the planet in an attempt to put together a group of mercenaries, all Kurosawa style. And that is exactly what this film is. The Seven Samurai, or the Magnificent Seven, in space. The farming planet, which is known as Akira, and its people, the Akira, are named after Akira Kurosawa. And this is another film with a great cast far too numerous to mention in full. But the film stars Richard Thomas as our heroic farm boy. As mentioned, Thomas is probably most famous for his role in The Waltons, but genre fans probably know him best for either Battle Beyond the Stars or the miniseries version of It. Then we have Robert Vaughn as one of our mercenaries. Vaughn was a prolific actor who is probably best known for The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and The Magnificent Seven. So it's probably a very little surprise that he plays essentially the same character in both Battle Beyond the Stars and the aforementioned classic Western. Next up we have the villain of the piece, the great John Saxon, who is just so darn saxy.
Gratuitous sax.
See what I did there? Saxy? That's pretty funny, right? Saxon was another prolific actor with appearances in Enter the Dragon, Planet Earth, and Hands of Steel. And before this entry starts to run too long, I wanted to mention George Peppard and Sybil Danning, who both have significant roles in the film, playing a space cowboy and a space Valkyrie, not necessarily in that order. Director Murakami had previously worked with Roger Corman on Humanoids from the Deep. He was the uncredited co-director on the film. With a budget of $2 million, Battle Beyond the Stars was Roger Corman's most expensive film to date, and supposedly the bulk of that went to Peppard and Vaughn's salaries. There was some interesting people behind the scenes as well. James Cameron built models, worked on special effects, and did production design, and then Bill Paxton was the on-set carpenter. Footage from Battle Beyond the Stars would end up getting recycled from many different movies, including Space Raiders, Fantastic Four, Forbidden World, and Vampirella. And lastly, I wanted to mention James Horner's score for the film. That opening music is one of my favorite movie themes of all time. See, wasn't that good? And number 3 on the list is Galaxina, also from 1980. Directed by William Sachs, who also directed the 1970s classic Van Nuys Boulevard, Galaxina is a sci-fi comedy that mixes in quite a few Western elements as well. And it tells the story of the crew of the space cruiser Infinity as they journey to find a mystic gem known as the Blue Star. And of course they get into all kinds of hijinks. And among the crew is the android Galaxina, who rocks a mighty fine bodysuit, as any good 70s and 80s space lady should. The film stars Dorothy Strayton as Galaxina. Strayton was a Playboy playmate and aspiring actress. Her career was rather short though due to her untimely passing that very same year. But she was in Skate Town, USA, in an episode of Buck Rogers titled Cruise Ship to the Stars. And in the first version of this episode, I accidentally said Battlestar Galactica, and oh folks, let me hear about it. Next up we have comedian Avery Schreiber as the distinguished Captain Butt. Schreiber is a face that I'm sure most of you know, even if you aren't aware of his name. This mustachioed funny man made appearances in Caveman, Cannonball Run 2, Hunk, and Robin Hood Men in Tights. He was even on an episode of the first season of The Muppet Show. And finally, Galaxina features appearances by Tad Horino of Eliminators, Rhonda Shear from USA Up All Night, and some voice work by channel favorite Percy Rodriguez of Jaws trailer fame.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution.
As mentioned, there's quite a bit of Weird West in this film, and that's because in its earliest stages, it was intended to be a comedy western. It eventually morphed into a sci-fi film, but the aforementioned western elements remained. There is a western-style saloon scene that is a particular standout of the film, and it easily rivals the Star Wars Cantina scene in terms of unique, cool, and charming alien designs. One of which is a Mr. Spock parody. And if you need anything else to sell you on this one, the Batmobile from Batman 66 makes an appearance in the background. I could stop this entry here, but I guess I'll go on. Another neat classic sci-fi reference in the film is a scene where some of the characters are viewing the 1960/1962 sci-fi film First Spaceship on Venus. Reason being, Crown International owned the distribution rights for both films. Galaxina, in my nearly humble opinion, is one of the most underrated space opera films of all time, not to mention being a highly underrated comedy as well. And on that, let's take a break, but don't change that dial, we'll be back.
Only from the producers of Dungeons & Dragons games, from the very center of the great spiral galaxy to the only planet offering Star Frontiers game, driven by a force unstoppable. Not knowing why, but programmed to purchase.
Star Frontiers game.
Star Frontiers role-playing games, products of your imagination.
And we're back with number 2 on the list, and that's Flash Gordon, also from 1980. I'm starting to think that 1980 was to space opera what 1957 was to creature features. Directed by Mike Hodges of Get Carter fame, Flash Gordon is the big screen adaptation of the Alex Raymond comic strip of the same name. And it tells the story of Flash Gordon, a professional athlete who, along with the travel agent, soon finds himself on an alien world ruled by the villainous yet sharply dressed Emperor Ming the Merciless. With a ragtag group of hero-adjacent characters, Flash stands against the foppish Emperor. And the film stars Sam J. Jones as our titular hero. Jones is probably best known for this very film, but he also did a bunch of spiffy stuff like Baywatch and a childhood favorite of mine, Renegade, starring Lorenzo Lamas. He also just happened to star in one of my favorite 80s comedies, the highly underrated My Chauffeur. Next we have Max von Sydow as fashion icon Ming the Merciless, and I know some of you probably think I'm kidding, but I'd rock those Ming outfits in a heartbeat. Von Sydow was a Swedish actor with a career spanning 70 years. but some roles of note include Conan the Barbarian, Never Say Never Again, and the voice of Vigo the Carpathian from Ghostbusters 2.
Why are my drippings with goo?
And I should probably also mention Dune, or the angry villagers will show up at my house again. Then we have Ornella Muti as the princess of the film and Ming's daughter. Muti, pronunciation unknown, is an Italian actress and my favorite space princess. She has quite the resume herself. What I find most interesting is that she was the inspiration for Emanuele Taglietti's Sukiya covers. And Sukiya was an Italian comic book of the less than safe work variety that ran from 78 to 86. But look at those covers, it's clearly her. And finally, I wanted to mention a few other notable actors in the film, including Timothy Dalton, Brian Blessed, and Richard O'Brien. This is another with a really stacked cast. As I often say, this is one of the best looking films ever made. It looks like a comic book come to life. And sure, it may not technically achieve as much as that Star Wars picture, but it's a far better looking film in my sleazy tiki opinion. Except for the Lizardmen, not really sure how they slipped through. But the film began with producer Dino De Laurentiis, who developed an interest in making the film after Barbarella. He initially wanted Fellini to make the film. At one point, George Lucas of American Graffiti fame attempted to secure the rights. When this didn't work out, Lucas went on to make a couple of sci-fi pictures of his own. And speaking of, segue master that I am, it is commonly known that Kurt Russell read for the role of Han Solo. But less widely known is that Kurt also read for Flash. Russell was De Laurentiis' first choice for the role, but Kurt turned it down, feeling the character was a bit bland. Now it's time for an honorable mention, and that's Barbarella from 1968. And Barbarella is probably my favorite space opera film, but I did a full standalone video on it already, and I'm thinking about redoing that one. And number one on the list, Star Crash from 1978. Co-written and directed by Luigi Cozzi, who also wrote and directed Lou Ferrigno Hercules films, Star Crash tells the story of a scantily clad space smuggler who ends up on a mission to destroy a superweapon wielded by Space Joe Spinell. And this is yet another in the unfairly compared to Star Wars category. But according to Cozzi, the design work and the script predate the release of Star Wars. And the big inspiration for Star Crash was not that galaxy far, far away, but the Sinbad film by Ray Harryhausen. Cozzi even calls Star Crash a science fantasy film, not science fiction. And I realize I keep saying Cozzi, not sure if it's Cozzi or Cozy, but, you get what you pay for, as I often say. His goal was essentially to make a Sinbad in space film, with there being rumors that actually began with the title Sinbad on Mars. Which certainly explains the casting of Caroline Munro, who Cozzi said was his only choice for the role of Stella Star. There's even some nice stop-motion animation in the film, which is very Harryhausian. Supposedly there was a dinosaur scene as well that was cut from the final film. There's also a persistent rumor that the producers came to Cozzi and straight out asked for a Star Wars-style film, but he had never seen it. So he read the Star Wars novelization and then wrote the script. I find this one highly unlikely though. As mentioned, Star Crash stars the lovely Caroline Munro as our go-go dancer-esque smuggler and space hero Stella Star. I'm sure you all know Miss Munro from her numerous standout roles, which include The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, The Spy Who Loved Me, Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, the Dr. Fives films, and one of the greatest films that never actually got made, the Hammer film version of Vampirella. Of course, next I have to mention Munro's husband at the time, actor and musician Judd Hamilton as the suit actor for the android L. He didn't voice the bot though, that was actor and singer Hamilton Camp. And as I pointed out in my top 1970s sci-fi robots episode, I do find it odd indeed that L was played by a Judd Hamilton and a Hamilton Camp. Also in this impressive cast is Christopher Plummer as the Space Emperor and Joe Spinell as our big bad. Plummer did several sci-fi pictures including Star Trek VI, which, and I know I'm going to take some heat for this one, is probably my favorite Star Trek film. Plummer took the role in Star Crash mainly because he wanted a trip to Rome. He even joked that he would have done an adult film just for an excuse to film there. And to finish out this excellent cast, we have the Hoff himself. Yep, I was just looking for any excuse to play that clip again, because hot dog, I dig that song. And in case you're wondering about the rumors circulating about this film, they are indeed true. Star Crash is, in fact, a prequel to Baywatch. Prince Simon changed his name to Mitch, married Nina Van Horn, and settled down on Earth. And that's all the time we have for this weekend. Let me know some of your favorites. This will hopefully become a series here at the Snack Bar. I've already begun my notes for a follow-up, and yes, Space Hunter is on the list. Please like, comment, subscribe, watch the skies, and stay atomic.